So we're going to go back into another Vipassana meditation. And again, we're going to be focusing in the area of the 3 marks of existence. So I'll just explain a few details about the meditation and then less talking during the meditation. So again, we're going to be using the object as the field of the body, as we did in the last meditation. In this meditation, you've got basically 2 choices. You can either scan serially, as we did in the last meditation, at your own pace, or you can do a more random approach, just noticing things in different parts of the body. So you can choose whichever approach you want. With either of those 2 approaches, when you perceive something arising in the field of the body, some sort of sensation, then you can ask 3 questions. Not just, is this stable and unchanging, what I'm observing, but also, is this in the nature of happiness, this experience or sensation? And also, is this the self? Is this me, what I'm experiencing? So we can ask all 3 questions of whatever is arising in the field of the body. So again, either doing the serial scan or a more random approach, just noticing things in different parts of the body. So again, the 3 questions is this what I'm experiencing stable and unchanging? Is it in the nature of happiness? Is it the self? Is it me? Okay, is that clear? So again, I won't be doing much guiding. I'll just start with the preparation and then leave you to do that investigation yourself. Okay, so let's do that practice now. And then I'll talk a little bit more about this practice, this Vipassana practice. So we begin by preparing the body, keeping the back nice and straight, and allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And also keeping the body as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement or fidgeting. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. Letting go of any thoughts of the past or the future. And simply allowing the mind to rest in the present moment. Focusing on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Again, we can engage in a Vipassana practice, focusing on the field of the body. So again, two methods. One is either to scan serially the body from the crown of the head to the tips of the toes, or the other option is to have a more random approach, noticing things in various parts of the body. With either of those approaches, when you notice a sensation in the body, you can ask 3 questions. Is it stable and unchanging? Is it in the nature of happiness, that experience? And is it the self? Is it me? Whatever is arising in the field of the body, is it stable and unchanging? Is it in the nature of happiness? And is it the self? So let's now have a look at the stages we go through in this Vipashyana practice. In fact, it's the same 3 stages we go through in all practices. And I like to use the Tibetan words here because they're very brief. So the first stage of practice is go in Tibetan, which means intellectual. So the first stage is to get a clear intellectual understanding of the practice. Of course, here, Vipashyana practice, so here with the 3 marks of existence, first we would gain an intellectual appreciation of what is impermanence, dukkha, and no self. What do they mean? So that we can have a basis for practice. But of course, if we simply leave it at the level of intellectual understanding, that's not, even if we have a super perfect, correct understanding of impermanence, dukkha, and no self, that in itself is not really going to change much in our life, because our life is not driven by our intellectual understanding, it's driven by instinctive habit. So we need to first gain an intellectual understanding, because this is going to be the framework for practice. If we don't do this, and unfortunately some people don't like this aspect of study and reflection, they just want to meditate. So they just sit down and meditate, they have maybe some sort of experience, but then how to interpret that experience is almost impossible because we have no framework for interpretation. So first, gain intellectual understanding, then bring that into practice. And meditate on impermanence, dukkha, and no self, and start to have a little taste or experience of these in meditation. This, of course, will depend on how stable our mind is. If our mind is not very stable, if our mind is caught up in dullness and distraction, we can put a lot of effort into meditation and not really get anywhere, because we won't be able to really get to have any taste or experience because our mind is too distracted and too dull. So that's why shamatha practice is key. The shamatha practice, developing a calm, clear, focused mind. The more we can do that as a basis, the more we will start to have some experience in meditation. The more stable our mind is, the more impact this experience will have on our mind. So much so that that taste or experience in meditation can then continue a little bit in daily life, maybe for a few moments, a few minutes, a few hours, maybe even a few days. And during that time then in daily life, we're still being affected by that experience of, say, impermanence or dukkha or no self, which means during that period, we are more in tune with reality, because we're now sort of more instinctively seeing things as changing moment by moment, or in the nature of dukkha, or having there being no self. So therefore, we're much more in alignment with reality, and you'll find during that period, agitation less mental afflictions, and more in sort of tune with reality. But of course, our old habits will slowly reassert themselves, and we'll go back to our normal way of experiencing reality. So what we'd like to do, of course, is to have that being more stable, more long-lasting. So that's the third stage. And that is tok, or realization. So realization is having a very stable experience of these 3 marks of existence in meditation, so that these experiences then permeate throughout the day outside of meditation. So this is realization. For us to have this, we need a very stable and clear mind. we need this mind of shamatha. So that's why shamatha is very critical if we really want this realization. If we really want to transform our minds permanently so that they do not revert to their old habits, then we need to move to this stage of the practice. So these are the stages we go through. So before we go back to another meditation, let's briefly look at how these stages of practice, particularly the second and third stage, how that will affect us with regard to each of those three marks of existence. So if we really start to have some taste and experience of impermanence in meditation, then experientially, outside of the meditation, we're going to start to experientially see things as more in a flow state, as changing moment by moment. And if we can really do that in daily life, then that has a very positive impact on us, because then, particularly with our pleasant experiences, it's going to be very hard to have attachment, because that object that we are having pleasure from, we'll see is changing moment by moment. So there's actually nothing to grab hold of. So in fact, often you'll find in the texts, what is the direct antidote to attachment is this, impermanence. To reflect on impermanence, to come to taste and experience impermanence. Because if we can see things as flowing in daily life, then there's nothing really to grab. And so we can simply enjoy that pleasurable experience without trying to hold on to it, without craving an attachment. And similarly goes, of course, for unpleasant experiences, nothing to push against. So also aversion will decrease. So by realizing impermanence, starting to have an experience of that, it's going to very much reduce attachment and aversion. But also, this experience of impermanence, that things are in a constant state of flow, actually realizing this is very close to realizing emptiness, the topic for this afternoon and tomorrow. Because if we can realize everything's in a state of flow, then actually there's no discrete object moving through time, is there? I mean, normally our superficial understanding of impermanence is there's this pen, and in the next moment it's slightly different, and it's slightly different. So we have this sort of notion there are discrete objects that somehow change a little bit one moment to the next. But actually that's not really what impermanence means. Impermanence means there are no discrete objects changing in every moment, there's just change. So if we come to experience and realize this, we'll realize actually there is no discrete objects moving through time, there's just flow of change, which is very close to realizing emptiness. So this is a very good basis for the emptiness practice as well. Then if we come to experience and taste dukkha, the unsatisfactory nature of our existence, of course, again, with pleasant experiences to come to realize change, again, we're going to stop craving and grasping for them. We're going to realize nothing out there is going to give me any lasting happiness. And then if we go on to realize the all-pervasive nature of dukkha, then we're going, particularly understanding that the source of suffering is the mental afflictions, through coming to taste and experience, realize dukkha, that's going to lead us to, instead of looking out there for the source of happiness and suffering, we're going to turn our attention inwards. And through this experience, we're going to more easily develop this aspiration for liberation, this thing which was translated as renunciation, the entry point into the Buddhist spiritual path. So by coming to experience and realize dukkha, that's going to form the basis of our entry into the Buddhist spiritual path to develop the aspiration for liberation, the aspiration for nirvana. And then, of course, if we start to taste and experience no self and realize no self, this ignorance is the basis of mental affliction. So we're going to find that having this experience or realization, then mental afflictions will reduce, And then by moving from experience to realization here, we'll start to wipe out that fundamental ignorance. And through this realization, we'll start to move towards the goal of liberation. So this is how, if we internalize our intellectual understanding, if we come to experience and then realize these three marks of existence, the impact they will have on us in our daily life. Any questions about that before we go back to the next meditation? Anything? Anyone would like to? Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm able to explain myself, but I'm kind of having a trouble with the, let's say, how does one then respond to external world? If you realize, or you haven't really realized yet, but you're kind of intellectually starting to understand that, understand impermanence, and then you start to think about intellectually still.
Sure.
About your attachments,
sure.
and things that you like,
sure.
that you find pleasant, and,
sure.
and about pleasure. It's very difficult. I mean, on that level, when you're still only intellectually understanding it. So it's very becoming
exactly.
It's becoming more difficult in a way.
Because again, one is that when we come into situations, and unfortunately in our modern society, we're constantly bombarded by stimulus.
Exactly.
So we don't have the luxury of sitting there and then maybe after a few minutes, certainly a little stimulus arises, then we can think about that. We're just bombarded.
Yeah.
And again, what happens is, of course, we react out of habit. So again, because we don't have very good mindfulness, again, this is the key, shamatha, this is the key here, is because we don't have very good mindfulness, before we know it, we've already reacted. We're already caught up in craving. We're already caught up in aversion and anger and so forth. When we're in that state, it's almost impossible to use the intellectual mind because our mind is out of control already. So yes, in a practical way, with no mindfulness and intellectual understanding, we're just going to get even more frustrated because we know what we're doing is wrong and there's a better way, but we can't implement it. So the first key to this is to start to develop mindfulness. If we get through the shamatha practice and then being mindful in daily life, if we can improve our level of mindfulness, we'll have this little window of opportunity. It may only be half a second or a second from stimulus to reaction. Usually that window is very small. Usually we can't catch it because our mindfulness is not developed enough. But if we develop our mindfulness, we'll be able to take advantage of that window. That from a Buddhist perspective is where, we can talk about free will comes in, choice. If we don't have mindfulness, there's no choice. If we have mindfulness, then if we've developed intellectual understanding, there's a small possibility that in that little window, our intellectual mind can go, oh, craving that is not going to bring me anything, or having aversion, so let's just let that go. So that will start to be small help. You'll find with very strong stimulus, it's not going to work because that strong stimulus is going to overwhelm our intellectual mind. What you'll find is that for weak stimulus that causes a small reaction, if with mindfulness, the intellectual mind can sometimes help to not react, sometimes. But the key is if we leave it at that level, it's always going to be a struggle. We're never really going to get very far. What we need to do is continue to cultivate mindfulness and then meditate on this, like the body scan. For example, simple body scan. If we keep doing that practice, then we get in the habit of observing sensations in the body arise and pass, rise and pass, rise and pass, which means in daily life, without really even intellectually thinking about it, when some sensation arises in the body, instinctively we're going to just be observing it arise and pass a little bit more because that's what we've been doing in meditation. So what you'll find is without even intellectually thinking about it, small things that used to create a reaction, maybe small things that used to irritate you a little bit, you'll notice, wow, those things don't irritate me anymore. What's going on? And what's going on is that small irritation that's arising in the body, you're managing to observe and let it pass without intellectually knowing. So this is the key, is if we only leave it in intellectual, it's going to be a big struggle and we're not really going to get very far.
I think I'm more referring to all the strong attachments and temptations in daily life, like chocolate.
Sure.
I just love chocolate.
But what you will find, the thing is here, what people do is they either get caught up in that craving, or if they understand craving's no good, what do? They just try and suppress it, the craving. Exactly. That doesn't help.
No,
it doesn't help at all. So what we need to do is to find that middle way. And that middle way is, for example, coming to realize impermanence, to coming to realize dukkha and no self. If we realize these things, then what you will find is that experientially, if you have strong craving for chocolate because you like the taste of it, you'll find more and more you'll actually enjoy the chocolate more than you do now, but there'll be less craving for it. If it happens to be there, you'll enjoy it. If it's not there, it's okay. You won't eat too much of it. You'll find this will start to happen. So if you don't internalize, it's always going to be a struggle. You're always going to have craving for chocolate and you're always going to try and not resist it. And it's not going to work. It's not going to work because we've still got it's just intellectual. And then we're just going to get, like I said, even more frustrated because we think we've got an answer, but we can't implement it.
Exactly.
That's it. So that's why shamatha is key. I mean, without that, it's just going to be this intellectual struggle and frustration, and we're not going to get anywhere. With some shamatha practice, a more stable and clear mind, plus Vipashyana practice, then you will see slowly in daily life, the craving for chocolate will decrease. And when you actually eat it, you're going to enjoy it more because you're not sort of worried about, oh, am I going to get enough of this, or, because that'll drop away. And then you're going to start to enjoy little things that you find boring now. In fact, your enjoyment of life will increase across the board. Because often people feel if I get rid of attachment, my life's going to become bland and boring. I'm not going to like chocolate anymore. It's exact opposite.
Okay.
During the meditation, I had conflictual answers, but in a good way. So I had a sensation in the body, and I tried to really stay with it.
Right.
So I observed thoughts that tried to get away. So I came back to that thought, and then I asked the three questions.
Sure.
So is this sensation stable and unchanging? If I can stay with it long enough, then I can observe that change.
Right.
So if thoughts took me away, I came back.
Sure.
And then I could say, is that sensation still the same?
Sure.
That was the first step.
Right.
Second, is this in the nature of happiness? In other words, could this sensation, if it was increased, could that cause me great pain and suffering? And I said, yes, probably. If it's intense enough, it probably could distress me. But then I thought, by staying with that, by accepting that this is the condition of my body and the condition of my mind, that presence of mind could be an everlasting source of happiness.
But then you're talking about the mind and not the object. So here we are seeing experiences or objects in the nature of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So when we ask these three questions, we need to be a little bit careful and don't turn it into an intellectual exercise. These three questions are to look directly into the very experience, the very object. And if we get into too much intellectualizing, then often our intellectual mind has got a lot of false assumptions in there and we'll come up with some very smart, wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
So this Vipassana practice is about direct observation. Directly, is that experience, is that in the nature of happiness? Look at it directly, that experience, and just sit with it. And is it stable? Just look at it directly. and watch. And is there a self there? Just look directly and see if you can see a self. Once you start bringing in all sorts of intellectual things, saying, well, if I did this, I wonder what would happen there, then we're really going out of Vipassana territory into philosophical territory. So we need to be very careful in this Vipassana practice, because Vipassana is about coming to direct insight. So we are trying to look directly through direct experience. Is that stable? Is that in the nature of happiness? Is there a self there? Okay, so we have to be a little bit careful with this.
Okay, so I was introducing a second factor, my relationship to the object, the so-called object.
Yeah. So
because then that secondary experience gave me a different answer.
So if you ask different questions, then that could be gaining different sorts of insight. So here we're looking at the insight of impermanence, dukkha, no self. So of course we can start to ask other sorts of questions, which may lead to a more experience, understanding, a taste of emptiness, for example, in terms of the observer and the observed and so forth. But here we're just really looking for those three things. Otherwise, we go all over the place. So it's good to really, because if we go too diverse, we're sort of the jack of all trades and the master of none. So if we keep it onto the point and just, I mean, we can do just one of those three, you know, impermanence, just work with that. And the more that you can work with that, the more you'll really come to realize everything's impermanent. Whereas if you're asking this and this and this and this and you're going all over the place, that could be interesting, but then you're not really penetrating any particular one point.
So how could I stay with that? The second question, is this in the nature of happiness?
Is just look at that experience and see whether from the side of that object or the side of experience, is that in the nature of happiness? And then just sit with that. Just sit with that. Okay. You don't need to then, you just look. Okay. Just look.
But could you please explain a little bit about what is in the nature of happiness? What are we looking for there?
Yeah. That was a little bit what I talked about before, is that if something is in the nature of happiness, one, that experience would always create happiness. And two, if we sat with it, we should become more and more happy.
Okay. So it's very easy to answer no to that question.
Well, no, but you just look from your direct experience. You don't have to intellectualize.
Well, that's what I mean. It's very easy. Something is itching. Would that make me happy? No.
Yeah, so
I mean it doesn't take a long time to realize
that question is particularly interesting if you have some pleasant experience. That question is more relevant. I mean, and that question also, I was using at the sort of, because this question is about realizing dukkha. Yeah. But the way I'm asking the question is really we're pointing here. Yeah, we can ask it in a slightly different way to address this point. Yeah. But at the moment, I'm just staying here because it's a little bit easier for us to work here than here.
Yeah. Can you say what all-pervasive meant again?
Yeah. So, I mean, so, you know, we're talking about unpleasant and pleasant experiences. What you could do is you could relate that to sort of the neutral experiences, if you want, is that even in a neutral experience, that's unsatisfactory because there's always a potential in that experience for suffering to arise if something came. So this is just really the potential for suffering to arise. That's sort of the deepest understanding of our experiences. Why is that potential there? Is because our mind is contaminated by the mental afflictions.
Does it make a difference if we are asking the negative or the positive, like, is this permanent or is it impermanent?
I mean, of course, it probably doesn't really matter because the thing is that I was asking it in the way of what we are really believing and grasping to now. Is it really that? Because that's what we're holding to. So the idea is to look at that and is it really how we see it to be? So that's sort of more provocative because it's challenging our belief.
Yes.
Yeah. Whereas if you put it in the negative, you may sort of like brush it off and go, no, 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 that's not right. Whereas if you look at, is it really how I think it is? Let's look. And then you'll see, then you'll realize the opposite. Okay, let's do one other meditation before we go for lunch. So again, we're going to do Vipashyana, and this time, we're going to look at for the same three: impermanence, dukkha, no self, but this time, instead of focusing on the body, we're going to use the mind. So we're going to use the field of the mind and look in our own mind. Whatever is arising in the mind, we're going to ask the same three questions. So whatever's arising, thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images, any sort of experience, whatever is arising in the mind, is it stable and unchanging? Is it in the nature of happiness? And is that the self? So we're going to do that for meditation, and then we'll have a break for lunch. So settling the mind, or settling the body first, of course, into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen. And simply allow the mind to come to rest in the present moment, focusing on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Now we can engage in Vipassana practice using the field of the mind as the object, as the area of focus. So with observing the mind, it's often recommended to have the eyes at least partially open, vacantly resting your gaze in the space in front of you. Or if you find that too difficult, then for this meditation you can also have them lightly closed. And then simply bring your attention to the field of the mind and simply observe whatever mental events arise in that field. Thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images. And whatever arises in that field, ask 3 questions. Is this stable and unchanging? Is it in the nature of happiness? And is it the self? Is it me? And use your direct observation to try to answer these questions, rather than turning them into some sort of intellectual exercise. whatever arises in the field of the mind. Use your direct observation to see if it is stable and unchanging, to see if it's in the nature of happiness, and to see if it is the self, if it's me. So let's break there for lunch. Now, we've run over time a little bit, so we have just under an hour for lunch. Is that enough for everyone? Everyone's okay with that? Should we still come back at 1:30? Okay, so we've got 55 minutes for lunch, and we'll see you back at 1:30.
Thank you.